Oh man, I don't feel so good. I really need to take a vacation. I'm literally getting sick of this. Say it with me. Psychoneuroimmunology. Psychoneuroimmunology. Say that 3 times fast. That's a mouthful. But that's definitely a really interesting and, very important field of research. So psychoneuroimmunology involves psychologists, that's the psycho part, neurologists, like biologists and medical professionals, and what they study is how psychology and biology can affect your immune system. So these researchers all combine their experience to study the effects of psychological factors on our immune system and, by extension, our physical health. So here's a few important things that we've found in psychoneuroimmunology. We found that periods of high stress are correlated with increased symptoms of many infectious diseases. So what that means is, singular events of extremely high stress can lead to becoming physically ill later. We also know that stress can decrease the effectiveness of many vaccines. And stress can suppress the immune system long after the stressful experience is over. So like I was saying a moment ago, a single event of high stress will just make you more likely to become sick, and it'll make you more likely to become sick over a long period of time. And finally, academic pressures, poor marital relationships, and sleep deprivation have all been linked to a decreased immune response. So it is important for your physical health that you maintain a good relationship, or you just get enough sleep. One of the most interesting things that's come out of psychoneuroimmunology is the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS, which was developed by Hans Selye. So this refers to a predictable series of bodily reactions to prolonged stress. And it will occur, stress will occur in 3 stages. First you have the alarm reaction, then you have resistance, and then finally exhaustion. And it's that resistance stage where we're going to see some of the most harmful effects occur. So the most harmful effects of stress are the prolonged secretion of what are called glucocorticoids. But we'll talk more about that in just a moment. That first stage, the alarm reaction stage, that's when the person first experiences the stressful situation, and they kind of kick their body and their brain into gear in order to deal with the situation. That's when you have the sympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system increasing your heart rate, increasing your breathing rate, and things like that. That's when you just, quite literally, for some people, you freak out. You're like, wow! You're just angry, you're frustrated, you're scared even. So extremely high levels of this kind of alarm reaction, extremely high levels of this kind of acute stress can be deadly. I've already talked about how overstimulating your sympathetic branch can lead to heart attacks. So that's definitely something that you should keep in mind, that you can literally die from too much stress. But there's more than one way. That's just one way stress can do serious damage. The other way is in stage 2, in the resistance stage. Because in the resistance stage, what's happened at this point is you had that alarm reaction, like you were faced with a stressful situation, you reacted to it, but you never resolved it, right? So if you don't resolve it, then you go to stage 2, where your body just kind of has to adapt. Your body has to adjust to get used to this chronic stressful situation you're experiencing. So your body will adjust to the chronic stress, but it does so at a high physical cost. What I'm saying is you'll become less capable of doing things. Your body will be more fatigued. You'll just feel more tired, and you won't be able to deal with stressful situations as effectively anymore. Just as an example, if you're experiencing a whole lot of stress that you can't deal with, if you're in this resistance stage, you might find that tiny little stressors, like micro stressors, can send you over the edge. So this is why you might see somebody, burst into tears in Starbucks because they dropped their coffee. And it's not really about the coffee. Like, these people seem crazy. They seem kind of sad in a way. But you need to keep in mind, they're probably not having that, extreme reaction just because of the coffee. There's probably something more going on in that person's life. Maybe they're having a severe relationship problem, or maybe their boss is giving them a whole lot of grief in the workplace. But if the person stays in the stage long enough, if the person never resolves the source of the stress, never resolves this stressful situation, then they'll eventually get to stage 3, which is exhaustion. So this is when the body can no longer, tolerate stress. This is when the body's resources that it was using to adjust to this chronic stress are depleted. And this could easily result in the, contraction of various kinds of psychosomatic diseases. A psychosomatic disease is just a disease that you get because of your psychological state. Or it could lead to just overall loss of health, or maybe even complete collapse, like you stop doing everything. Here's a few signs for you to be able to identify somebody who's on the brink of exhaustion. So first, there's some emotional signs like anxiety, apathy, irritability, and fatigue. And then there's some behavioral signs like avoidance of their personal responsibilities, avoidance of relationship maintenance, extreme or self-destructive behavior, or just overall self-neglect and poor judgment. And then there's physical signs like excessive worry about illness, frequently becoming ill, exhaustion, overuse of medicines, physical ailments, just like physical problems with the person's body, basically. And this kind of exhaustion can definitely lead a person into what we tend to call burnout or career fatigue. So career fatigue is something that you can see with pretty much any career, but it's definitely the most common in the helping professions. So I'm talking about like doctors and counselors and psychiatrists and things like that. So this is definitely a job-related condition where it has these physical, emotional, and behavioral elements of exhaustion. And there's a few different ways you can overcome burnout. The most obvious way would be to take a break, take a vacation, go to Hawaii for a couple of weeks, and then when you come back, you'll feel like your batteries are a bit recharged. If that's not really an option, or if that isn't really going to work for you, there's other techniques, like maybe you could just change your work schedule. If you work during the weekends, maybe you can change so that you'll be able to get the weekends off and work more during the week. Or maybe you can change the type of work you do. So if you mostly do like paperwork, maybe you can talk to your boss and get a more, hands-on position where you don't have to worry about that annoying paperwork anymore. Or if all else fails, you can literally just change your career. And this is what a lot of, counselors do. Like maybe they'll start working for a bigger company, but get sick of that and then start their own independent, like counseling, office. So if you want to see a little bit more about burnout, I've included a link for it in the comments. There is another theory of stress, and that would be the cognitive theory. So the whole idea behind this theory is that, potentially stressful events are appraised. It means we evaluate them, we judge them. We try to determine if this potentially stressful event is, if it is actually stressful for us, like does it involve some kind of a challenge? Is there some potential threat or loss from this potentially stressful event? And if we interpret it in that way, then we will go on to like a secondary appraisal, where now we're going to try to figure out if we can easily overcome this problem. Or maybe we don't really have many options on how to deal with it. So it's this kind of two-step appraisal process that leads us to determine whether or not we should experience stress, and to what extent we should feel that stress. So that's why we call it the cognitive theory of stress, because it's really more so about how the person perceives this potentially stressful event. It's not really about the event itself. Now, when you do experience an extreme amount of stress, when you're going through that resistance stage, like I mentioned, you could develop a psychosomatic disorder. So a psychosomatic disorder is a physical problem that results from psychological origins. I've said many times now that feeling extreme amounts, feeling like acute stress or chronic stress will significantly weaken your immune system. And these kinds of psychological stressors can do serious damage. So I'm definitely not talking about something like hypochondria. You know, hypochondria is when you just like pretend or you imagine that you have a disease. When it comes to a psychosomatic disorder, you have the disease, but the reason why you have it is because of stress, because of psychological factors. Now, the most common disease people experience, one of the most common diseases people experience when they are too stressed, are heart problems. So coronary heart disease. So this refers to the narrowing or blockage of the coronary arteries, and this is responsible for a huge number of deaths every single year. Now, we mostly attribute this to things like poor diet, not enough exercise, and things like that. You know, there's a whole long list of different kinds of behavioral risk factors for coronary heart disease. But something we didn't really understand until recently is that stress, you know, chronic stress or acute stress, is a huge risk factor. In fact, it's one of the primary risk factors for this disease. So if you have a huge amount of stress in your life, if you have this kind of elevated risk of coronary heart disease, then we would say you have what's called a cardiac personality, or sometimes called the type A personality. So people who have type A, they tend to, you know, perceive lots of stressors in their environment and react poorly to them. So this is a kind of person who's characterized by things like time urgency and competitiveness and hostility and anger. We sometimes use the term toxic hostility because it's kind of like they're almost like paranoid schizophrenic, like they think everybody's out to get them and they need to constantly be at high alert. I mean, if you're constantly at high alert, if you're constantly assuming that people are out to get you, then that's definitely going to be an extremely stressful experience, and that could easily result in serious health problems. Now, if you aren't like this, then you're type B personality. So type B personality is just a personality that's more so characterized by being more relaxed, you know, more easygoing, not really time urgent, not really competitive or hostile. Now, I have a really cool video in the comments down below explaining how this cardiac personality was discovered. So make sure you check that out. So because stress can be so health damaging, it really is in your best interest to take effort, you know, to take action to try to cope with those stressful situations. And you should focus on the two different ways that you can deal with the problem. So you can, first of all, you can focus on the problem, you know, try to eliminate that source of stress. But you shouldn't just focus on that. You should also focus on how you're reacting to this. So you should also focus on your own emotions, like how you perceive the stress, how you feel about this situation. So if you do both of those simultaneously, then you'll be much more effective. But we know that some people are just kind of naturally more resistant. You know, they can more easily overcome a stressful situation. So here's a few of the factors that we know promote resilience to stress. First of all, optimism. So if you have an optimistic outlook on life, if you always expect, good things to happen to you, then you're just going to be naturally more stress resistant. Because these harmful, these kinds of conflicts, these stressful situations that happen to you, you don't really perceive them as being bad things always. Quite often you'll perceive them as being potentially good things. The second factor would be hardiness. Now hardiness is kind of a complicated concept, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But there's a few other factors I'd like to mention also, like having religious faith. So feeling connected to something greater than yourself, feeling connected to some kind of spiritual entity can definitely help you to deal with physical stressors. It's kind of like you have this sensation that somebody up there has got your back. But you don't need to have that kind of spiritual connection to get that same kind of sensation, because we know that simply having a good social support network can do the same basic thing. So being a part of a social group, maybe just hanging out with a certain group of friends every so often, that can serve the same basic purpose. So now you kind of feel protected by other individuals. Other individuals are taking care of you, basically. And then the last factor I wanted to mention is perceived control. So if you feel like you have a certain level of control over this stressful situation, then you can, reduce the amount of stress that you'll experience. Now, I don't necessarily mean you actually have control, but you just perceive that you have that level of control. So a hardiness, I mentioned that as one of the factors. There's actually something called a hardy personality. So this is a personality type that's quite the opposite of cardiac personality that we were talking about earlier. The hardy personality is a kind of person who's just unusually resistant to stress. So hardiness is comprised of numerous factors. First, one of the most important ones is that the person feels a deep sense of commitment to either themselves, their work, their family, or some other kind of stabilizing value, like maybe their country or religion or something like that. Like they just feel like they have this, requirement to not be stressed because somebody needs them, because they're doing an important job for some group. The second one is that control I was just talking about. So the hardy personality, hardiness is all about feeling like you can control your fate, feeling like you can make important decisions. People with a hardy personality are very unlikely to suffer from learned helplessness. And then last, people with a hardy personality tend to see problems, tend to see stressors, not necessarily as challenges, but more so as like opportunities to demonstrate their capability. So it's what you might interpret, or what I might interpret as a serious threat, they would just see as a chance to demonstrate how cool they are, how efficient, how competent they are. Here's just a few techniques that you can use to manage your bodily reactions to stressful situations. First of all, you can get some exercise. We know that physical exercise will deplete those hormones that are produced by stressful situations. And by, basically running it out or working it out, or however you want to say it, by depleting those hormones, you'll feel less stress. So all I'm suggesting is if you're really stressed out about something, go to the gym or just run a few laps around the neighborhood. You'll feel much better. Another thing you could do is meditation. We talked about meditation in a previous video. That's just where you kind of sit quietly and try to focus on something very specific. Try to put your body into a relaxation response. Something similar to that would be progressive relaxation, where you just kind of sit quietly and you focus on individual muscles, you focus on individual parts of your body, and you imagine yourself relaxing those muscles. You imagine the tension leaving that part of your body. And then a fourth one that I wanted to share with you is guided imagery. Now, this is when you visualize things that are calming. You visualize things that are quite the opposite of the stressful experience you're having. To put it simply, this is when you go to your happy place. You imagine the world you would like to live in. You imagine how you would like the situation to be resolved. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that these stressors, they can do serious damage to your heart. Like, you could die of a heart attack simply by being overstressed. But there's other lifestyle diseases that are also, researched and talked about a lot in psychoneuroimmunology. The most obvious of which would be smoking. So smoking is perhaps the most common lifestyle disease. Smoking increases your risk of a heart attack and increases your risk of lung cancer, and it is definitely the #1 cause of preventable death in the United States. The second most common would be alcohol abuse. So this refers to the excessive consumption of alcohol, and that can, as you saw in previous videos, do permanent and serious damage to the brain and the body. Could even lead to death in many cases. And then finally, we have sexually transmitted diseases. So sexually transmitted diseases refers to numerous health issues that typically come about through risky sexual practices. So you have like bacterial STDs, viral STDs, and many other kinds. We'll talk about specific STDs in a later video. But by far, one of the most serious ones would be HIV, which can then lead to AIDS. So HIV is the virus. It's human immunodeficiency virus. So you can contract HIV from somebody who has it. But contracting that virus doesn't necessarily mean you have AIDS. AIDS usually is developed later on. So you can contract HIV and have it for a relatively long period of time before you even realize it, before you start to feel sick, before you contract AIDS. And AIDS is that acquired immune deficiency syndrome that causes so many deaths worldwide. Now, and in the less developed regions of the country, AIDS is a much more serious epidemic, but it's still a very serious concern in our country as well. So it's definitely good news that AIDS rates in developed countries like ours have definitely dropped off in recent years. But we can always do better. We can always try harder. So people like me over the last 23 years or so have been putting a lot of effort into trying to educate people into how STDs are spread. So STDs, they can be exchanged through sex, but the way that happens is mostly through blood. Like, a lot of people don't realize this, but pretty much every single time you have sex with somebody, tiny little micro tears will occur in both the lining of the vagina and sometimes with the penis, and blood can be exchanged in that way. So even if you don't think you exchange any liquids, even if you don't think you exchange any bodily fluids, there still might be an exchange that occurs. But of course, all kinds of bodily fluids can transmit AIDS, not just blood. So semen or a lot of other kind of vaginal secretions that can occur during sexual contact. But AIDS can actually be contracted in other ways as well. So beyond having sex with somebody, you can still get AIDS if, for example, you share drug needles. So just the basic idea is, for AIDS and many other STDs, any kind of exchange of bodily fluids could result in contracting that disease.